Under the afternoon sun of a convenience store parking lot, something extraordinary was about to happen. Something that would forever change the lives of a little girl and a man who had already given up on living. The rumble of idling engines filled the air, blending with the distant chatter of shoppers and the beep of car alarms. A weathered biker, his leather vest patched with the words "Hell's Angels," sat motionless astride his Harley-Davidson, one hand gripping the throttle he couldn't bring himself to turn. His name was Dominic "Ghost" Callahan, a man who had spent the last 6 months running from unbearable grief, shattered memories, and a heart that had stopped beating the day his daughter died. But on that terrible, beautiful afternoon, fate had a different plan for him. Dominic wasn't looking for redemption that day. He was there to end his story, to finally surrender to the darkness that had been swallowing him whole. The bottle of Jack Daniels in his saddlebag called to him like a siren's song, promising an escape from the crushing weight of loss. But as his bloodshot eyes drifted across the parking lot, something pulled him from the fog. A little girl, no older than 7, stood frozen beside a tall, muscular man whose arms were covered in tribal tattoos. Her small hand was trapped in his tight grip, but her eyes, her wide, terrified eyes, were scanning desperately for someone, anyone, to see her. The moment she locked onto Dominic, she didn't hesitate. She slowly raised her free hand, palm open, thumb tucked beneath her fingers, a signal, a rescue signal. Dominic had seen that hand sign before, scrolling mindlessly through his phone on sleepless nights, a silent cry for help when words couldn't be spoken. For a heartbeat, he thought maybe he was mistaken. Maybe his grief-addled mind was playing tricks on him. But then he saw the terror in her brown eyes, the way her fingers trembled as she held the signal steady, the white-knuckle grip of the man's hand around hers, and the paranoid way the man's head swiveled, checking for witnesses. The biker's pulse, dormant for half a year, suddenly hammered against his ribs. He didn't know this child, didn't know her name or her story, but something deep inside him, something he thought had died with Emma, roared back to life. Without thinking, without planning, he swung his leg off the motorcycle and his boots hit the asphalt. The man with the tribal tattoos noticed immediately, his body language shifting from hurried to hostile as Dominic approached. His jaw clenched, shoulders squared, eyes calculating whether this stranger was a threat he could intimidate or eliminate. The little girl's eyes locked onto Dominic's face, silently begging, "Please, please don't walk away." Dominic's heavy footsteps echoed across the parking lot as he closed the distance between them. He kept his hands visible, his expression as neutral as he could manage despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his voice gravelly but steady. The man instantly pulled the girl closer, his fingers digging into her shoulder as he muttered, "We're fine. Mind your own business." He started to turn away, already pulling the child toward a dark SUV idling at the edge of the lot. But Dominic's instincts, honed by decades on the streets, sharpened by fatherhood, and now fully awakened by desperation, screamed one word: danger. He noticed the girl frantically shaking her head side to side, her lips forming the word no that she couldn't speak aloud. He noticed the way she dug her heels into the pavement, resisting. He noticed the fresh marks on her wrist where fingers had gripped too hard. And Dominic realized something profound in that moment. He might not be able to save himself, but maybe, just maybe, he could still save her. If you believe in kindness, courage, and second chances, support this channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Dominic's hands trembled as they rested on the handlebars, not from the cold but from something deeper. Something that had hollowed him out from the inside. 6 months. Half a year since the world had ended, yet somehow his body kept going through the motions, breathing, eating when his brothers forced food in front of him, riding when the silence in his apartment became unbearable. The leather cut that once fit snugly across his shoulders now hung loose, the fabric sagging over a frame that had shed 20 pounds he couldn't afford to lose. His brothers had noticed. Of course they had. The way Snake watched him during club meetings, eyes heavy with concern. The way Reaper had started showing up at his place unannounced, checking in with excuses about needing to borrow tools or grab a beer. They knew. They'd been following him today, too. He'd caught glimpses of their bikes in his mirrors, hanging back just far enough to give him space but close enough to intervene if needed. If only they knew what he was really planning. The bottle of Jack Daniels pressed against his thigh through the saddlebag, its weight both terrifying and comforting. He'd bought it 3 days ago and had been carrying it ever since, waiting for the moment when he'd finally have the courage to crack the seal and not stop until the world went dark. He wasn't supposed to drink anymore, not after 5 years sober, not after he'd promised Emma he'd stay clean for her. Emma. The memory hit him like a fist to the gut. Her last soccer game, the way she'd scored the winning goal and run straight to him, her ponytail bouncing, her gap-toothed smile wider than the sky. "Did you see, Daddy? Did you see?" He'd lifted her up, spun her around, promised they'd celebrate with ice cream. That was a Tuesday. By Thursday, she was gone. The phone call had come while he was working on a bike in the garage. Unknown number, hospital. He remembered the nurse's voice, clinical and apologetic, explaining there'd been an accident. A drunk driver had run a red light, T-boned the car Emma's mother was driving. Emma hadn't made it to the emergency room alive. Dominic had identified her body in a morgue that smelled like bleach and death. Her small hand had already gone cold. He'd held it anyway, just like he had the day she was born, and something inside him had shattered so completely that he wasn't sure all the pieces still existed. Now he sat in this parking lot, engines silent, surrounded by the mundane sounds of everyday life that continued without her. Car doors slamming, shopping carts rattling, someone laughing in the distance. The world kept spinning as if his daughter hadn't been stolen from it. His fingers moved to the saddlebag zipper, hovering there. Would anyone even miss him? His brothers would grieve, sure, but they'd move on. The club would survive. His ex-wife had already moved on, remarried, pregnant again, building a new life that didn't include the ghost of their dead daughter or the broken man who'd fathered her. Maybe it was time to stop haunting this life. His hand gripped the zipper pull. That's when he saw her, the little girl with the raised hand, the signal cutting through his fog like a lighthouse beam through a storm. At first, the movement registered as nothing more than shapes passing through his peripheral vision, just more background noise in a world that had become static. But something made Dominic's eyes focus, dragging his attention away from the abyss he'd been staring into. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, moved across the parking lot like she was walking through quicksand. She wore a burgundy shirt that seemed too bright against the dull gray asphalt, her natural hair framing her face in soft curls that caught the afternoon light. But it was her eyes that pierced through Dominic's numbness wide, alert, terrified in a way that made his stomach clench with recognition. She wasn't alone. Beside her walked a man who seemed carved from violence itself, tall, easily 6'3", with shoulders that strained against his tank top and arms completely covered in tribal tattoos, thick black patterns that wrapped around his biceps and forearms like war paint. His name would turn out to be Tyrell, but in that moment, Dominic only registered threat. The man's jaw was set in a hard line, his free hand clenched into a fist at his side, and his eyes swept the parking lot with the paranoid intensity of someone who expected confrontation at any moment. The girl's small hand was trapped in his grip, her fingers pale from how tightly he held her. She stumbled slightly, trying to keep pace with his longer strides, and when she struggled to keep up, he yanked her forward without breaking his stride or looking down at her. Dominic's breath caught. There was something wrong here, fundamentally, viscerally wrong. Every instinct he thought had died with Emma suddenly flickered back to life like dying embers touched by oxygen. The girl's head swiveled as they walked, her eyes scanning faces in the parking lot with desperate precision. She was searching for someone, for anyone, and then her gaze locked onto Dominic's, and time seemed to slow. She didn't blink, didn't look away. Her lips parted slightly, and with deliberate, trembling movement, she raised her free hand, palm facing outward, thumb tucked beneath her fingers. 4 fingers extended upward, held steady despite the fear radiating from every inch of her small body. The rescue signal. Dominic's heart, which had been barely beating for 6 months, suddenly slammed against his ribcage so hard he could hear it in his ears. He knew that signal. Emma's school had taught it during a safety assembly last year, a silent way to signal for help when you couldn't speak, when your captor was watching, when words would only make things worse. He'd thought it was clever then, had practiced it with Emma at the dinner table, both of them laughing as they tried different variations. Now there was nothing funny about it. The girl held his gaze, her hand trembling but steady, her eyes pleading with an eloquence that needed no words. "See me. Help me. Please don't look away." Dominic's hands released the zipper pull of his saddlebag. The bottle of Jack Daniels suddenly seemed like it belonged to a different lifetime, a different person, a different crisis that had become irrelevant in the span of 3 seconds. His daughter was gone. He couldn't save her. But this child, this terrified little girl in a burgundy shirt, was right here, right now, begging him to see what everyone else was missing. And for the first time in 6 months, Dominic felt something other than grief. He felt purpose. The fog that had wrapped around Dominic's mind for 6 months began to burn away, replaced by a clarity so sharp it almost hurt. He watched the man and the girl with the hyper-focused attention he used to reserve for dangerous situations, the kind where reading body language wrong could get you killed. Tyrell's grip on the girl's hand was crushing. Even from 20 feet away, Dominic could see her fingers had gone white from lack of circulation, the small bones of her hand compressed in his massive fist like a bird trapped in a cage. She tried to pull away, a subtle, instinctive tug toward freedom, and Tyrell jerked her forward so violently that she stumbled, nearly falling to her knees before catching herself. He didn't even look down at her, didn't acknowledge her struggle. His attention was split between his phone and the parking lot around them, his head on a constant swivel, eyes darting from car to person to entrance, with the jittery paranoia of someone who knew he was doing something wrong and expected to be caught at any moment. The phone was pressed to his ear, and though Dominic couldn't hear the words, he could read the aggression in every line of Tyrell's body. His free hand sliced through the air in sharp, violent gestures punctuating whatever argument he was having. His jaw worked constantly, muscles flexing beneath the skin. His shoulders were hunched forward, coiled like springs ready to release. Then Dominic saw the SUV, dark blue, almost black, with tinted windows that made it impossible to see inside. It idled near the edge of the parking lot, exhaust puffing in rhythmic clouds, engine running, driver invisible behind the dark glass. Tyrell kept glancing toward it, adjusting his trajectory with each step, pulling the girl in that direction despite her resistance. Everything clicked into place with the terrible certainty of a loaded gun's hammer falling. This wasn't a father and daughter having a bad day. This wasn't even a custody dispute gone wrong. This was an abduction in progress, happening in broad daylight, in a public parking lot, while people loaded groceries and checked their phones and lived their ordinary lives, completely unaware that a child was being stolen right in front of them. The girl looked back at Dominic one more time, her hand still raised in that desperate signal, her eyes brimming with tears she was too terrified to let fall. She mouthed something he couldn't quite read, maybe help, maybe please, and something inside Dominic that he thought had died in that hospital morgue 6 months ago, roared back to life with such ferocity that it took his breath away. Every instinct he'd honed as a father, every protective impulse he'd thought he'd buried with Emma, every ounce of purpose he'd believed was lost forever suddenly screamed in unison, "This child needs you. Move. Now." His hand released the saddlebag completely. His legs swung off the motorcycle. His boots hit the asphalt with a solid thud that seemed to echo in his chest like a war drum. Dominic didn't know this girl's name, didn't know her story, didn't know if he'd survive what was about to happen, but he knew, with absolute certainty, that he couldn't sit on this motorcycle and watch her disappear into that SUV, not when he had the power to stop it, not when she'd chosen him, of all people, to trust with her silent plea. He started walking. Dominic's massive frame unfolded from the Harley like a shadow rising at dusk. 6'2" of weathered muscle and road-worn leather, he stood for a moment beside his bike, letting his presence announce itself before his words did. His boots hit the pavement with deliberate, measured steps, not rushing, not aggressive, but moving with the kind of purposeful stride that said he wasn't going to be deterred. The sound caught Tyrell's attention immediately. His head snapped toward Dominic mid-sentence, the phone still pressed to his ear, and his entire body language shifted in an instant. The paranoia that had been driving his movements crystallized into something sharper, more dangerous territorial aggression mixed with the cornered animal desperation of someone who knew their window was closing. "I'll call you back," Tyrell snapped into the phone, ending the call without waiting for a response. His eyes locked onto Dominic with the flat, calculating stare of a predator assessing a threat. "Back off, old man," he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the distance between them. "Mind your business." Dominic stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to avoid immediate escalation. His hands hung loose at his sides, visible, non-threatening despite the size of them. Years of navigating dangerous situations had taught him how to read a room, how to de-escalate without showing weakness, how to position himself as immovable without throwing the first punch. "Just checking if everything's okay here," Dominic said, his voice low and steady, the gravel in it smoothed by deliberate calm. He kept his eyes on Tyrell, but tracked the girl in his peripheral vision, noting every detail, every micro-expression. The girl's eyes locked onto Dominic's face with such desperate intensity it felt like a physical pull. Her lips parted, and she tried to speak, tried to form words that might save her, but Tyrell's grip on her hand tightened instantly, his fingers crushing down until she gasped, her face contorting in pain. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, but tears welled in her eyes, spilling over and tracking down her brown cheeks. "She's fine," Tyrell said, his voice hardening into steel. He took a step forward, pulling the girl slightly behind him, his chest puffed out in the universal male challenge of dominance and territory. He was younger than Dominic by at least 15 years, all coiled muscle and angry energy, his tribal tattoos seeming to writhe across his skin as his muscles flexed. "We're leaving. This doesn't concern you." He started to turn away, his hand already pulling the girl toward the idling SUV, but Dominic saw what he was meant to see: the girl digging her heels into the pavement, her small frame resisting with everything she had, her free hand reaching back toward Dominic even as Tyrell dragged her forward. "The thing is," Dominic said, not moving, not raising his voice, but somehow filling more space with his presence, "I think it does concern me. Because that little girl doesn't look like she wants to go with you." Tyrell froze mid-step, his shoulders tensed, his neck corded with veins. When he turned back to face Dominic, the mask of control had slipped, revealing something raw and dangerous underneath. "You calling me a liar?" Tyrell's voice dropped to a threatening growl. His hand moved to his waistband, hovering there in unmistakable implication. "You don't know what you're stepping into, old man. Walk away while you still can." But Dominic had already made his choice back at the motorcycle. There was no walking away now, not from this child, not from this moment, not when every fiber of his being screamed that if he turned his back, he'd never forgive himself. Tyrell made his decision. He spun on his heel and started pulling Amara toward the SUV with renewed urgency, his stride lengthening, his grip on her wrist iron tight. The girl dug her heels into the pavement, her small body leaning back against his pull with everything she had, but she weighed maybe 50 pounds to his 200. Physics was not on her side. He yanked her forward, hard, violent, without mercy, and her feet left the ground for a split second before she crashed back down, stumbling, her knees buckling. She would have hit the asphalt face first if his grip hadn't held her suspended like a rag doll. A small cry escaped her lips before she could stop it, and Dominic saw red. Something inside him snapped, not broke, but transformed. The grief-hollowed shell of a man who'd been contemplating suicide 5 minutes ago vanished, replaced by the enforcer he'd been 2 decades ago, the man who'd made grown criminals think twice before crossing the club. That version of Dominic hadn't emerged in years, but muscle memory didn't forget. "Let go of the girl." His voice dropped 2 octaves into a register he hadn't used since his enforcer days, cold as winter steel, absolute as death. carrying the kind of danger that made predators recognize they'd miscalculated their prey. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The threat was in every syllable. Tyrell stopped, turned, and laughed, a sound with no humor in it, just brittle bravado masking the first cracks of uncertainty. "Or what, old man?" He pulled Amara closer against his leg, using her as a shield. "You gonna make me?" His hand moved to his waistband, fingers wrapping around something concealed there, the outline of a gun visible through his tank top for just a moment. Dominic's body responded before his conscious mind finished processing. His weight shifted forward onto the balls of his feet. His hands, which had been hanging loose, moved incrementally closer to center mass. His eyes tracked the gun hand, calculating draw speed, distance to cover, angle of attack. 20 feet separated them. He could close that in 3 seconds if Tyrell drew. Maybe fast enough. Maybe not. The old Dominic would have known. This version, 20 pounds lighter and 6 months out of practice, wasn't sure. His muscles coiled, ready to spring anyway. If this was how it ended, dying in a parking lot trying to save a child instead of drinking himself to death beside his motorcycle, it was still a better ending than the one he'd planned. Then he heard it. The rumble started low, like distant thunder, then grew into the unmistakable roar of Harley-Davidson engines, multiple bikes, big ones, moving fast. Dominic didn't turn his head, but his peripheral vision caught the movement as 3 motorcycles roared into the parking lot entrance, their riders wearing leather cuts identical to his own. Snake, Reaper, Hammer, his brothers, who'd been following him all week, watching from a distance, worried about the darkness they'd seen consuming him. They'd been trailing him today, too, giving him space but staying close enough to intervene if he did something they couldn't undo. They'd chosen the perfect moment to close that distance. The 3 bikes spread out in a loose formation as they approached, engines throttling down but still rumbling with barely contained power. The riders dismounted in unison, their combined presence transforming the dynamic from a 2-man standoff into something else entirely, something that made Tyrell's bravado finally crack. His eyes darted from Dominic to the 3 new arrivals, his hand still on his waistband but frozen there, calculating odds that had just shifted dramatically against him. The arrival of 3 more Hell's Angels shattered whatever fragile control Tyrell had been clinging to. Dominic watched the transformation happen in real time, bravado crumbling like a sand castle against the tide, replaced by the wild-eyed panic of a cornered animal that knew it had run out of options. Tyrell's hand came out of his waistband, but it wasn't the gun Dominic had expected. It was a knife, 6 inches of serrated steel that caught the afternoon light as Tyrell's arms snaked around Amara's neck, pulling her small body in front of his like a human shield. The blade hovered near her throat, close enough that she went completely still, her breath coming in short, terrified gasps. "Back off." Tyrell's voice cracked on the words, desperation bleeding through the attempted authority. "All of you, back the fuck off or I swear to God." The knife trembled against Amara's neck. "She's coming with me." Amara was crying now, tears streaming down her face, her small hands gripping the arm around her throat but not pulling, too terrified to move, too smart to struggle when a blade was that close to her skin. Her eyes found Dominic's again, and this time they held something beyond fear, a heartbreaking trust that he would fix this, that he wouldn't let her down, that the signal she'd sent hadn't been in vain. Dominic's brothers moved without needing orders. Snake drifted left, Reaper right, Hammer staying center but back, the 3 of them forming a loose perimeter that cut off every escape route to the SUV. They moved like wolves, experienced, coordinated, and utterly calm in a way that made Tyrell's panic even more pronounced. Dominic took a slow step forward, his hands rising slightly, palms out in the universal gesture of de-escalation. His voice, which had been cold steel moments before, shifted to something softer, not weak, but measured. The tone you'd use to talk someone off a ledge. "You don't want to hurt her," Dominic said, his eyes locked on Tyrell's face, reading every micro-expression, every twitch of muscle. "Look at me. I know you don't want to hurt this little girl. Whatever's going on here, whatever you think you need to do, Hurting her doesn't help you. He took another small step. Let her go, and you can still walk away from this. No one's touched you. No one's hurt you. You can still leave. Shut up. Tyrell's hand shook harder, the knife wavering. Sweat poured down his face despite the cool air. His eyes darted between the four bikers, between the growing crowd of bystanders pulling out phones, between the parking lot entrances where any second the cops might appear. Shut up, you don't understand. Then, cutting through the tension like another blade, came the sound of sirens, distant but growing closer. Someone in the crowd had called 911. Tyrell's face went white. No, 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 no. His entire body tensed, the knife pressing slightly closer to Amara's skin, and Dominic's heart stopped. But panic made people stupid, made them stop thinking clearly, made them make mistakes. In his desperation, Tyrell's grip around Amara's neck loosened just slightly, just for a fraction of a second as he turned his head toward the sound of approaching sirens, his attention splitting between too many threats at once. It was all the opening Dominic needed. He moved. 20 feet disappeared in 3 explosive strides, his body remembering training from decades ago, his hand locking around Tyrell's wrist, the one holding the knife in an iron grip before Tyrell could even register the motion. What happened next was pure instinct, decades of muscle memory overriding conscious thought. Dominic's hand clamped around Tyrell's wrist with enough force to feel bones grind, and he twisted, using leverage and angle to force the knife away from Amara's throat. Tyrell screamed, his grip on the girl breaking as his body instinctively tried to protect itself from the joint lock threatening to snap his wrist. The moment Amara was free, Snake was there, his massive hands lifting her away from the danger zone with surprising gentleness, putting his own body between her and the violence unfolding. She was safe. That single thought echoed in Dominic's mind even as Tyrell's free hand came up swinging. The fight was brutal in its brevity. Tyrell was younger, desperate, fighting like his life depended on it, which, given what he'd just done, it probably did. He managed to wrench his knife hand partially free, the blade slashing out in a wild arc that caught Dominic's forearm, splitting leather and skin in a line of fire that should have made him let go. But adrenaline was a hell of a drug, and Dominic had spent a lifetime learning to fight through pain. He barely registered the warmth of blood soaking his sleeve as he drove his shoulder into Tyrell's chest, using his weight and momentum to take them both to the ground. They hit the asphalt hard, Dominic's knee finding Tyrell's back before he could recover, his hand still locked around that wrist, twisting until the knife clattered away across the pavement. Reaper kicked it further out of reach while Hammer moved in to help control Tyrell's other arm. Within seconds, the fight was over, Tyrell face down on the asphalt, Dominic's knee planted firmly between his shoulder blades, both arms twisted behind his back in a position that made any struggle immediately painful. Police cars screeched into the parking lot from 3 directions, sirens wailing, lights flashing, officers poured out, weapons drawn, shouting commands that barely registered through the ringing in Dominic's ears. He released his grip on Tyrell and raised his hands, letting the professionals take over, watching as they hauled Tyrell up and forced him into handcuffs. That's when the adrenaline crashed. It hit Dominic like a wave, his legs suddenly unsteady, his vision swimming at the edges. The pain in his arm finally broke through, sharp and insistent, and he looked down to see blood dripping steadily from his forearm, staining the asphalt in dark drops. The world tilted sideways, and his brothers were suddenly there, Snake on one side, Reaper on the other, their hands steadying him before he could fall. "Easy, Ghost," Snake murmured. "We got you, brother." "Medic!" Reaper shouted toward the police cars. "We need a medic over here." Through the blur of uniformed bodies and flashing lights, Dominic saw her. Amara broke free from the female officer who'd been kneeling beside her, her small legs pumping as she ran straight toward him. She didn't hesitate, didn't slow down, just crashed into his leg and wrapped her arms around it with all the strength her small body possessed. "Thank you," she whispered, her face pressed against his jeans, her voice muffled but clear. "Thank you for seeing me." Dominic's free hand came down to rest on her curly hair, gentle despite the tremor in his fingers. Something inside his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 6 months, cracked open, and he felt tears burning behind his eyes for the first time since Emma's funeral. "You're safe now, sweetheart," he managed, his voice rough. "You're safe." And for the first time in half a year, Dominic felt like maybe, just maybe, he was going to be safe too. The paramedic worked efficiently, cleaning the slash on Dominic's forearm with antiseptic that stung worse than the original cut. The wound wasn't deep enough for stitches, just a long, angry line that would scar but heal. Dominic sat on the back bumper of the ambulance, watching the organized chaos unfold around him while a female detective interviewed Amara nearby, her questions gentle, age-appropriate. The story emerged in pieces, passed between officers and witnesses like puzzle fragments, finally forming a complete picture. Tyrell Jennings, Amara's mother's ex-boyfriend, a man with a history of domestic violence and a restraining order he'd violated the moment he learned Amara's mother had died. He'd been watching the girl for weeks, learning her routines, waiting for the perfect moment. That afternoon, during a visit to her grandmother's house, he'd broken in through the back door. The grandmother was elderly, easily overpowered. By the time she'd called police, Tyrell and Amara were already gone. Amara had learned the hand signal 6 months ago during a school safety assembly. When Tyrell stopped at the convenience store to make a phone call, she'd prayed anyone would recognize what she was silently screaming. "She's a smart kid," the detective told Dominic, her eyes soft with admiration. "That signal saved her life." Then the crowd parted, and a man came running across the parking lot like his world was ending or beginning. Dominic couldn't tell which. Mid-30s, well-dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt, his tie askew and his face streaked with tears. He dropped to his knees in front of Amara, and she launched herself into his arms with a sob that carried 6 hours of terror finally released. "Daddy, baby girl, oh God, baby girl." Devin Mitchell held his daughter like she might disappear if he loosened his grip, his shoulders shaking with sobs he didn't try to hide. He kissed her hair, her forehead, checked her for injuries with trembling hands, whispered reassurances that dissolved into incoherent sounds of relief and love. When he finally stood, still holding Amara against his chest, he turned to Dominic. The detective had already pointed him out as the man who'd intervened. Devin approached with Amara's arms wrapped around his neck, her face buried in his shoulder. "You saved her," Devin said, his voice thick. "You saved my daughter." Dominic nodded, not trusting his own voice, but Devin was studying him with an intensity that went beyond gratitude, professional assessment, bleeding through the father's relief. His eyes tracked the hollowness in Dominic's face, the tremor in his bandaged hand, the fresh scars on his knuckles that spoke of walls punched in grief. "You're a grief counselor," Devin said quietly, and it wasn't a question. It was recognition. "I am, and you." He paused, shifting Amara's weight. "You're drowning in it. I can see it. You saved her. But who's saving you?" Before Dominic could answer, before he could deflect or deny or retreat behind the walls he'd built, his phone rang. The ringtone cut through the parking lot noise like a knife. He pulled it from his pocket with his good hand, saw the name on the screen, Detective Sarah Chen, Emma's case. His hands shook as he answered. "This is Dominic." "Mr. Callahan, this is Detective Chen. I have news. We've arrested him. The driver who killed Emma, we found him in Nevada after another DUI. He's been extradited. He'll face trial." The parking lot tilted. 6 months. 6 months of waiting, of the case going cold, of believing justice would never come. And today, this day, of all days when he'd been ready to end it, when he'd saved a child instead, when he'd felt purpose for the first time since losing Emma. Today they'd finally caught him. Dominic's legs buckled. Snake caught him before he hit the ground, but he barely registered it. The phone slipped from his grip, and Devin was there, still holding Amara, his free hand steadying Dominic's shoulder. "Breathe," Devin said softly. "Just breathe. Whatever just happened, breathe through it." But Dominic couldn't breathe, could only stare at nothing while his mind tried to process the impossible timing, the cosmic alignment of his daughter's killer being caught on the same day he'd saved another father's child. The same day he'd chosen life over death. Devon's counseling office was nothing like Dominic had imagined. No clinical white walls or leather couch straight out of a movie. Just a small room with warm lighting, comfortable chairs that didn't match, and walls covered in children's drawings, a testament to the families Devon had helped piece back together. Dominic sat in one of those mismatched chairs, his bandaged forearm resting on his knee, and tried to find words for things he'd never said aloud. 2 weeks had passed since the parking lot. 2 weeks since everything had changed. "There's a picture on my refrigerator," Dominic said, his voice rough from disuse. He'd been silent for the first 10 minutes of the session, and Devon had let him sit with it, not pushing. Amara drew it. "A little girl holding hands with an angel," she said. "It's Emma. They're both watching over a man on a motorcycle," she said. He stopped, swallowed hard. "She said Emma told her to draw it for me." Devon nodded, his expression open, non-judgmental. "Kids have a way of seeing things we can't, or won't." "The bottle's still there too," Dominic continued. "Jack Daniels in my saddlebag. Haven't opened it. Every morning I wake up and think today might be the day. But then I look at that picture and I—" He trailed off, his jaw working. "It's like a test I have to pass, every single day." "Tell me about that day," Devon said quietly. "The parking lot. What you were planning before you saw Amara." So Dominic told him. About the 6 months of drowning, about the weight loss and the tremor and the way his brothers watched him like he might shatter. About sitting on that motorcycle with his hand on the saddlebag zipper, working up the courage to drink until he couldn't feel anything anymore or until he worked up the courage for something more permanent. About how he'd been seconds away from giving up when a 7-year-old girl raised her hand and pulled him back from the edge. "She saved me," Dominic said, and his voice cracked. "I thought I saved her, but she saved me first." Devon was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When he finally spoke, his words were careful, gentle. "Maybe Emma sent her to you. Maybe that's why you're still here, because you still have purpose. Because your daughter's death wasn't the end of your story, just the end of a chapter." Dominic didn't believe in signs. Didn't believe in fate or cosmic intervention or any of the comforting lies people told themselves to make sense of senseless tragedy. But he couldn't deny the timing, the arrest on the same day as the rescue, the way Amara's terror had mirrored his own, the impossible alignment of 2 lives hanging in balance and both being saved. That evening, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Dominic rode to the cemetery for the first time in 4 months. He'd avoided it, unable to face the reality of Emma's name carved in stone. But now he parked his Harley on the path and walked to her grave with steady steps. He sat on the grass beside her headstone, one hand resting on the cool marble. "I met a little girl," he said to the name etched in granite. "Her name is Amara. She needed help, and somehow I was there. I don't know if you had anything to do with that baby girl, but—" His voice broke. "But I'm going to try, really try, to keep living, to be the dad you deserved even though you're not here to see it. To honor you by not wasting the life you don't get to have." The wind moved through the trees surrounding the cemetery, rustling leaves in a pattern that almost sounded like music. And somewhere in that sound, maybe in his imagination, maybe in something deeper, Dominic swore he heard his daughter's laugh, bright and unburdened and free. He rode home as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and purple, and for the first time in 6 months, tomorrow didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. The road stretched ahead, endless and uncertain, but he was finally ready to follow it. Not running from his past anymore, but riding towards something new, carrying Emma's memory with him, carrying Amara's trust, carrying the knowledge that broken things could still protect, that hollow men could still be filled with purpose. 1 day at a time, 1 mile at a time, he was going to make it. 1 year later, Dominic stood in the parking lot of Amara's elementary school, his Harley gleaming in the afternoon sun. He'd been invited to speak at their safety assembly, the one where they taught kids the hand signal that had saved a little girl's life and, in doing so, saved his own. The bottle of Jack Daniels was gone from his saddlebag now, poured out 6 months ago in a ceremony with his brothers that had felt more sacred than any church service. In its place sat something else, a laminated drawing of two girls holding hands, one earthly, one angelic, watching over a man on a motorcycle. Amara had made him 3 copies, one on his refrigerator, one in his wallet, one that traveled with him everywhere he rode. The school doors burst open, and children flooded out in a wave of color and noise. Amara spotted him immediately, her burgundy backpack bouncing as she ran. She was taller now, her hair styled in elaborate braids, her smile wide and unafraid. Devon followed at a more measured pace, briefcase in hand, but his smile matched his daughter's. "Mr. Ghost." Amara crashed into Dominic's legs with the enthusiasm of a child who'd never learned to fear the world, despite what it had tried to teach her. "Did you see? I got an A on my math test. Daddy said we could get ice cream to celebrate." "That's my girl," Dominic said, his hand resting on her head with a gentleness that still surprised him sometimes. Smart and brave, Devon reached them, extending his hand for their ritual greeting, half handshake, half embrace. Over the past year, their counseling sessions had evolved into friendship, 2 widowers helping each other navigate grief while building something new from the wreckage. "You ready for tomorrow?" Devon asked. The trial was finally starting. The drunk driver who'd killed Emma would face a jury, and Dominic would have to sit through every minute of testimony, every painful detail of the worst day of his life. "Ready as I'll ever be," Dominic said. "But I'll get through it. I've learned I can get through anything. Because of Emma," Amara said with the matter-of-fact certainty of children who understood more than adults gave them credit for. "She's still watching over you. She told me in a dream." Dominic's throat tightened. He knelt down to Amara's level, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "You know what I think? I think you're right, and I think she'd be really glad I met you." "Me too," Amara whispered, then threw her arms around his neck in a hug that smelled like grape juice and childhood innocence reclaimed. That evening, Dominic rode to the cemetery as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. It had become his weekly ritual, talking to Emma, telling her about his life, about the kids he'd spoken to at schools, about Devon and Amara and the family he'd found in the wreckage of loss. He sat beside her headstone, the grass soft beneath him, and pulled out the photo he always carried Emma at her last soccer game, her smile brighter than the sun, her whole life ahead of her. "The trial starts tomorrow, baby girl," he said softly. "I'm scared. I'm angry. I'm a lot of things. But I'm not alone anymore. You made sure of that, didn't you? Sent me that little girl right when I needed her most." The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of spring flowers and fresh earth, life continuing, seasons turning, the world spinning forward even when hearts wanted time to stop. "I'm going to be okay," Dominic continued, and this time he believed it. "Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. I'm living for both of us now. I'm choosing to see the signals, to help when I can, to be the person you always believed I was." He stood slowly, his hand resting one more time on her headstone. "I love you, Emma. Always will, but I'm not running anymore." As he walked back to his motorcycle, Dominic felt something he hadn't felt in over a year, not happiness exactly, but something close to peace. The grief would always be there, a permanent passenger on every ride, but it no longer drove. He did. He swung his leg over the Harley, the engine rumbling to life with a sound that felt like a heartbeat. As he pulled out of the cemetery, he glanced in his rearview mirror one last time, and in the fading light, he could almost see her, his daughter, smiling, waving goodbye with one small hand raised. Not a rescue signal this time, just a wave, a blessing, a release. The road stretched ahead, endless and uncertain, painted in the colors of sunset. Dominic twisted the throttle and felt the wind against his face, carrying him forward into whatever came next. He was broken, he was healing, he was alive, and for the first time since the world had shattered, that was enough. The Harley's engine roared, and Dominic rode toward tomorrow, not running from his past, but carrying it with him like precious cargo. Emma in his heart. Amara's drawing in his saddlebag. The promise he'd made to both of them tucked close, to never stop seeing the signals, to never stop helping, to never stop choosing life even when life felt impossible. 1 mile at a time, 1 day at a time, one small hand raised in the darkness, reminding him that even the most broken souls could still be someone's saving grace. The road called, and finally, Dominic answered, not as ghost, but as a father, a friend, a man who'd been given a second chance and refused to waste it. He rode into the sunset, and somewhere in the wind, he swore he heard 2 girls laughing, one he'd lost, one he'd saved, both watching over him as he found his way home. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Stories like this remind us that compassion can come from the most unexpected places and that a single brave moment can change a life forever. By supporting this channel, you help spread awareness, hope, and the power of human kindness. Thank you for being part of this community.